Hey everybody, Todd here. Welcome back to another Wellness Talks brief. This is actually going to be a book review, and it's going to be based on, I've had a lot of views when it comes to what is integral theory, so I thought I would go a little bit further into something that's near and dear to my heart. Now, I have a whole other video which talks a little bit about what is integral theory, but I wanted to give you a quick overview then of where I got all these ideas from in the book and where it's all based upon, and so that you can go out and get it yourself. This was the original book that I had picked up that time, 20 some years ago or 20 years ago. And it's a theory of everything. Now, remember, at the time I was looking for the physicist, and I couldn't remember what his name was. It turned out to be Stephen Hawking. But I did know that the name was a theory of everything. But his was actually a brief history of time, or a brief history of everything. So I was off, but I was dead on when it came to finding this particular book. What's great about this is that it does walk through every single component, and it's all boiled down into about 180 pages. Some of that is actually reference notes, and that was really, really important. One word of warning when it comes to this book is that even though it is deceivingly small, it's really a large construct. It's a large theory to begin to play around with, and it breaks down into multiple theories: internal and external of an individual, internal and external of the collective. In other words, the four quadrants. It looks at lines of development. This doesn't really get too heavily into a lot of the different lines, but there are estimated 70 plus different lines out there and 24 agreed upon ones, and why those are important. And it gets into some of that as well. Goes through the different stages that we all move through. So that's the levels inside of there, which are actually each one of those lines has levels or stages. Gets into the types. And so a very simple component when it comes to that would be masculine and feminine, type A, type B. You're familiar with those components by this point, I hope. And then, of course, states. States of mind, states of being, sleeping state, dreaming state, hallucinatory state, and even emotional states as they move through. Now, it was 20 years ago that this book was released, and it was roughly 20 years ago that I just happened to grab it. I'm guessing that when I was in the Barnes & Noble store way back when, or Borders Books, can't remember which one it was, that this was prominent. It was brand new. It was out, so that's why I saw it, and that's why I grabbed it. And like I said, this goes through a lot of the different components in incredible detail. This book took me 9 months to move through. But the reason I just kept engaging is because I would read a section and go, oh my God, that actually really makes concise some of these notions, these beliefs, these thoughts that I've been having. And boom, there it was. And so it would just keep me going. And then what would happen to me often is it would talk about Habermas, or it would talk about Oppenheimer, or talk about Arabundo, and I would have no idea who these people were. So if you don't know who people like that are, have contributed to how the mind works, how consciousness works, this is a great place to start. It's going to give you a lot of the different bases. I do recommend that this is actually one of the two everything books. There is another book out there, and it's the one that goes along, and it's called the Everything Books, and it would be a brief history of everything, also by Ken Wilber. That one's kind of a question and answer series where it walks through, and he takes a lot of the concepts in this book and he lays them out over the breadth of time, so you can actually watch as these concepts emerged and became who and what we are today, individually and as a collective. It's quite breathtaking. It blew me away. Now, in this book, that there are two major takeaways that I would focus on the most. And the very first one is probably the crux of the whole system, and that's understanding the four quadrants. And what that really boils down to is four different types of truth. And like I talked a little bit about briefly a moment ago, was the internal and external of an individual. Those are two of the quadrants. And then the internal and the external of the collective. Those are the other two quadrants. If we can use all four of those quadrants, if we can use all four of those truths, so if you think about internal of an individual, subjective truth, the external of the individual, objective truth. If we look at the lower section of this four quadrants, the internal of the collective, that would be the cultural rules and tools. And then if we looked at the external of the collective, that would be all your systems, like railroads, postal systems, laws, so on. And if you can really begin to play around with just that one component inside of this book, it's a new filter. It's a way to actually begin to detect what kind of truth is this, and how will I make this align? How do I take all these ideas in my head and make them align so that when you come across a piece of research, if you start to play around with it, you're like, all right, I see that this is kind of upper left. This is the interior of the individual, and they're making some pretty strong claims that this, like mind over matter, that this actually can affect that. If we stay inside of this framework, we would realize that that's actually not possible. Now, there may be different ways that it looks like this, and it just allows you to explore and to come up with, where is the person coming from that's saying this? Where is their orientation? Where is my orientation when it comes to these things? Am I trying to take all of these different components of reality and make them fit my internal perspective of that reality? So it really pairs well with the ACT work that I do, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, based in relational frame theory. And the two of them blend really well together. One kind of builds on top of the other. I'm actually in the process of working on a paper that actually shows how integral and ACT, acceptance and commitment theory, do have a symbiotic relationship. And it would make complete sense if you look at the four quadrants and you put ACT inside of those four quadrants. ACT is really taking into account these four areas: the internal of the individual, the external of the individual, the behaviors, the things that the person actually does, the internal of the culture, how that actually affects the individual, and the external of the individual and how those things also affect the individual. Now, ACT is focused in its treatment on the upper left, the internal of the individual, but it does really, as an approach, as a theoretical system, takes into account these four areas, which is why I think ACT is probably one of the better third generational psychodynamic or psychotherapeutic approaches. All of that is because of this particular book. I also use the outline in here to put together social programs. I used this to build a dance scene in the old town that I used to live in, York, Pennsylvania. So quick shout out to anybody out in York that might be listening. It was because of this theory that I started the dance group, which is still here to this day, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure I utilized a framework like that. I also used it with all of my health programs, and a lot of those programs still continue to exist and were more effective than other programs that I had run before I actually began to implement and utilize the framework. And perhaps in a few other videos, I'll talk about how to take the four quadrants and apply it to your business, to your family life, to your craft that you do, whatever it happens to be, because it's so dynamic, and it's just a framework. It's just a map. It's not the actual reality. You can get completely lost and totally geek out in this, and to no end. You can just take this until it's extreme, which if that's what you're into, that's great. And there actually is, because of people like Wilbur who did just that we have this information. But I am more a little pragmatic, want to be able to utilize it, want to be able to put it into place and really benefit from it. So I thought you should take a look at that. And then the second component inside of here would be the stages or the levels, which of course ride on the back of lines. So they're kind of interchangeable. Different concepts, but they absolutely link together and give us a strong base. And inside of that, it actually allows you to be able to look around and see, to make it really simple, pre-modern, modern, postmodern, traditional, conventional, post-conventional. So there's different ways that we can utilize this and make better sense of the world around us. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend picking up the A Theory of Everything or A Brief History of Everything. Actually, if I could go back in time and tell myself which one to pick up first, I would actually would have told me to get the Brief History of Everything first, because that would have given me, it would have primed me, made me ready to actually go through and read all of this. I hope you enjoyed this. Pick it up. Right now with COVID-19, we've got lots of time, and it's actually in paperback. It's not another electronic source, so we can get away from that whole digital bombardment that we've been going through. And I hope you get a lot out of that book. I know that I have, and it shows up in a lot of the videos that I do. So now that you know it's there, you can keep an eye out for it if you watch any of the other videos on my channel. Until the next time, wishing you the best that can possibly be. Stay safe. See you soon.